Good morning, beloved. Welcome to Jumpstarting Your Sundays. This morning, I want to talk about the idea when God makes a way, or when God makes the way. And I want to use for a backdrop the experience of Israel as they were being delivered from Egypt and moving through the Red Sea and then into the wilderness. And for those of us who are familiar with the story, who have read our Bibles, I don't really want to give an address this morning. I think many of us are familiar with the journey of Israel from Egypt through the Red Sea into the wilderness, then over the Jordan and into the Promised Land. Many of us are familiar with that story, and just for brevity's sake, I didn't want to actually read the passage, but you can go back and read the story for yourselves. But I wanted to speak on the idea when God makes the way. Sometimes we're seeking the Lord and we're asking for God to give guidance and to give direction, and even when the direction may seem to be obvious or apparent, we still wonder. And I hope this morning that what I share can be encouraging or helpful as you try to discern, the way that God is making. And so with several points I want to share on that idea of when God makes the way. The first thing I think we should know about when God makes the way is that when God makes the way, it's hardly ever the way that we would have chosen. Amen. When God makes the way, it's hardly ever the way that we would have chosen. It's hardly ever what we would have picked. It's not the way that we in our flesh would have decided to go. When we consider Israel and their plight in coming up out of Egypt, they could have went the way of the king's highway. They could have went the easy way. But God brought them by the way of the Red Sea. Amen. And so one of the things we need to understand that when God is making a way, is not the way that if we had to cast a vote, if we had to give our opinion, it is not the opinion or the vote that we would have given. The second point about when God makes the way is understanding that it's going to require faith. When God makes the way, it's going to require us to have to totally depend on Him. Amen. God does that for a reason. Because first of all, God desires that we are dependent on him in everything. And so when God is making a way, if you're expecting everything to be there, if you're expecting all of the resources to be obvious and apparent and right there in front of you, that's usually not the case. When God makes the way, it is going to require that we trust him, that we depend on him every step of the way. There's never going to be a moment where we can sit back and take it easy. It's going to always be a situation where we have to trust God on a minute by minute, an hour by hour, a day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year. Y'all ain't helping me. Payment by payment, premium by premium. When God makes the way, it usually, most often means that we have to depend on God every inch of the way. And God does it that way so that he can get maximum glory. Do you hear what I'm telling you? God does it that way so that he can get maximum glory. And the third point I want to share about when God makes a way, and that is, when God makes a way, it means that along with the problems, there's several things we can depend on. And I tried to take care in presenting that point because I wanted to make sure I added that clause. Along with the problems, hear me, along with the problems, when God makes a way, we can count on several things. Along with the problems, hear me, when God makes the way, we can count on several things. The first thing we can count on, along with the problems, is God's presence. Amen. When God is making a way, we can count on the fact that God is going to be with us. Amen. That should encourage somebody. Amen. Even though the problems are going to be present, when God is making a way, he's going to be with us. Do you remember God's awesome presence in the pillar of a cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night for 40 years as Israel journeyed in the wilderness? Amen. Even though we can all admit that nobody would want to be traveling or journeying in the wilderness, it must have been an awesome thing to know that even though they were in the wilderness, they had the unquestionable presence of God. Every morning, they looked out their tents and there was a pillar of a cloud. Every night, they went to bed with the light of the fire from that pillar, which was an indication that God was with them. And so along with the problems, one of the things we can count on when God makes a way is God's presence. The second thing we can count on, along with the problems, is God's provision. It's been said, and sometimes it's said in other ways, but where God leads, he provides the need. Where God leads, he provides the needs. Amen. And so when God makes a way, we can count on his provisions. We can count on God to supply all of our needs. You remember Israel out there in the wilderness, a whole nation marching out there in the wilderness. But the Bible teaches us that their clothes didn't wear out, their shoes didn't wear out. God gave them water from a rock. God gave them manna to eat. God gave them quails for meat. God met all of their needs, even in the wilderness. And so when God makes the way, along with the problems, the second thing we can count on is God's provision. Then the third thing we can count on, along with the problems, is God's protection. Oh my God. Do you know they were out there in the wilderness, and in every respect, they were vulnerable. But God protected them. God protected. God provided his protection. And when God is making a way, along with the problems, we can rest in the fact that God is going to protect us. You know, God is not like some of us. You know, you take somebody along a trip and something happened, and man, you can't count on that person to step in if something breaks out. You can't count on that person to step in if you need protection. But my God, when the Lord makes a way, we can count on his protection. The fourth thing we can count on when God makes the way is we can count on his promise. Along with the problems, we can count on God's promise. The things that God has promised us. And sometimes when we're going through tests and trials, when we're going through the wilderness experience, we can wonder, hey, what about all those things the Lord has spoken to me? What about all those things the Lord has promised me? But listen here, along with the problems, when God makes a way, we can count on God still keeping his promise. No matter what it looks like, if God made a promise, it's going to manifest. Despite the problems, despite the tests, despite the trials, despite the going through, if God promised it, you can best believe he's going to fulfill it. And last thing I want to share, that when God makes a way, along with the problems, we can count on his pruning. Are you there? Along with the problems, when God makes a way, we can count on his pruning. Not the fact that he just sometimes will use the experience to cut off and the undesirable things within us, but sometimes God cut people out of your lives, and God cut things out of your life. He'll prune you to make you better for the journey. So those are just several things we can count on in that latter point. We can count on his presence. We can count on his provision. We can count on his protection. We can count on his promises, and we can count on God's pruning along with the problems. Amen. So when God makes a way, we don't have to be confused. We don't have to worry when we decide, I would rather go another way, but since this is the way the Lord is providing, we can take heart and we can be encouraged when we make the decision to follow God's way. This is Overseer Everett. God bless you and enjoy your time in church.